Hey guys, tonight we're going on a journey together, but don't pack your suitcase. You won't need a toothbrush or socks or deodorant because we're waking up in the grimy, groggy heart of a medieval village. Your body aches, the room smells like something between mold and manure, and there's an unfortunate squelch under your straw mattress that you're better off not investigating. Welcome to your new life in the Middle Ages, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up to the sound of a rooster that doesn't care it's still pitch dark outside. You're wrapped in a blanket that smells like feet and mildew because it probably doubled as a cloak last winter and no one's washed it since. Beneath you, the mattress is just a sack of straw, now flattened and crawling with some determined fleas and perhaps a few lice who've made you their summer home. There's no alarm clock, but your body already knows what's next. The frigid bite of morning air because there's no insulation, and your one tiny window is just a hole with a wooden shutter that doesn't close right. You sit up, slowly, because the ache in your lower back feels like it aged 3 decades overnight, and stretch just enough to brush your fingers against the low, soot-darkened ceiling beams. At the foot of the bed, the chamber pot, half full. The smell wafts up to greet you like an aggressive handshake, and there's no avoiding it. You used it in the middle of the night, just like everyone else in your one-room cottage. Modern plumbing hasn't been invented, and toilet paper is a concept reserved for the distant future. If you're lucky, there's a scrap of wool cloth somewhere nearby. If not, well, moss is absorbent, right? Your tiny home has a dirt floor, and it's never been swept. The thatched roof overhead lets in the occasional drip when it rains, which is often. Walls? If you're fortunate, they're wattle and daub, a charming euphemism for woven branches smeared with mud and dung. In winter, this keeps out precisely 0% of the cold. That's why you sleep next to the fire pit, which is currently a heap of ash with a faintly glowing ember that did absolutely nothing to keep you warm last night. There are no separate bedrooms, no privacy. Your whole family sleeps together in this single cramped room, and if you're really unlucky, so does your goat. Medieval families kept livestock indoors to keep them safe from thieves. It also meant the place always smelled faintly of warm, cheese and something much worse. You glance around for anything that resembles comfort, but remember, cushions haven't reached your social class yet. Furniture is rudimentary. A wooden stool, one creaky table, maybe a shelf for your meager belongings, a wooden spoon, a single pot, and a woolen tunic that's both your outfit and your blanket on especially cold nights. Now here's the kicker. This isn't even a particularly bad morning. In fact, it's normal. The typical peasant didn't expect comfort. Warmth? Maybe during the 2 weeks of summer. Cleanliness? Hey, as long as the fleas aren't in your ears. And breakfast? You'll get to that soon, but let's just say nobody's flipping pancakes. Historians still argue whether the average peasant truly considered their life miserable, or if they simply had no context to imagine anything else. After all, there was no Instagram to make them feel bad about their breakfast porridge, but from your very modern vantage point, the lack of heating, sanitation, and basic hygiene puts your survival odds somewhere between doubtful and 0, if it's January. And if you're wondering how everyone lived in these conditions, the truth is, they didn't for long. Life expectancy hovered around 30 to 35 years, though infant mortality skewed the numbers. If you made it past childhood, you might reach 50. Assuming you avoided war, famine, the plague, childbirth, accidents, infections, and angry lords with swords. As you scratch at your flea bites and try to muster the willpower to stand, remember this is just the beginning of your day. You haven't even faced the icy water for your bath yet, or stepped outside to the charmingly unsanitary street. Still you sigh and sit up fully, feet pressing into cold dirt. You're hungry, tired, and likely already infested with something. But there's no rest in the Middle Ages, not for a peasant like you. Time to start surviving, or at least try to. Or you shuffle toward the cracked wooden basin near the doorway, rubbing sleep from your eyes and dislodging a crumb or two from your hair. Don't ask how they got there. This is your morning wash, and it's already disappointing. There's no running water, no gentle lavender-scented soap, and definitely no mirror to judge how puffy your face looks. Just a chipped bowl filled with yesterday's murky rainwater and a rag that smells like it's seen things. You splash the water on your face. It's freezing, of course, and the shock sends a shiver through your spine. But there's no avoiding it. In the Middle Ages, cleanliness isn't exactly next to godliness. It's more like a vague suggestion. You give your armpits a half-hearted scrub and wipe your hands on your tunic, which really just moves the grime around. Congratulations, you're now exactly 3% cleaner than when you woke up. Soap, in the modern sense, is a luxury. If you had access to it, and that's a big if, it'd be homemade from rendered animal fat and lye, which means it's basically medieval napalm for your skin. The best case scenario? Your hands are raw and your eyes sting. Worst case? You now smell like a roasted sheep, and then there's your teeth. Or what's left of them. Dental hygiene in the Middle Ages is more superstition than science. Toothbrushes haven't been invented yet. Instead, people chew on twigs, rinse with vinegar, or simply hope that their breath isn't too offensive. Spoiler? It is. And with no dental care to speak of, you're lucky to make it into your 20s without a mouthful of abscesses, loose molars, and perpetual gum disease. Fun fact, some monks recommended rinsing your mouth with wine to kill tooth. Worms, yes, tooth worms, because they believed pain in your teeth came from tiny creatures burrowing inside. Historians still argue whether this theory was widespread or mostly confined to more eccentric corners of Europe, but either way, you're not brushing today, or tomorrow, or ever. You pick up your coarse linen cloth, basically a medieval towel, and pat your face dry. It's not very absorbent. In fact, it kind of just pushes the water around like drying your hands with a single tissue after a rainstorm. You try to comb your hair with your fingers, snagging on knots and wishing for conditioner. Or, any product that doesn't include rendered pig oil. You notice a red patch on your arm. Could be a bug bite. Could be scabies. Could be an early sign of plague. You scratch it and then immediately regret that decision, but honestly, you've got bigger problems. The cottage doesn't have a sink or a drain. Water just runs across the dirt floor until it dries or soaks in. There's a faint trail of footprints, mud, and other unmentionables near the threshold, where people come and go without removing their shoes, because shoes are precious and no one owns a second pair. Some medieval people did bathe, contrary to popular belief. Public bathhouses were a thing in larger towns, at least until the church started associating them with sin and syphilis. Even before the Black Death, moral panic about shared nakedness led many to abandon the whole idea. Afterward, water itself was sometimes seen as dangerous, thought to open the pores and invite disease. So, ironically, not bathing became a kind of health advice. And in case you're wondering, yes, body odor is omnipresent. Everyone stinks. You stink. Your family stinks. Even the goat stinks. But it's a kind of communal stink, and you all stop, noticing after a while, probably, maybe. As you gather your things for the day, really just a satchel and your own tolerance for misery, you try to mentally prepare for what's next. There's no toothpaste, no deodorant, and you've already developed a blister on your heel from those stiff wooden clogs. But hey, you washed your face. That's something, right? And here's a strange little detail to carry with you. Medieval. People sometimes carried pomanders, small scented balls filled with herbs and spices, to help mask the overwhelming stench of daily life. Think of it like a wearable air freshener that hangs around your neck. Rich folks had fancy versions made of silver. You'd be lucky to find a half-rotted clove. Historians still debate how often the average person actually tried to stay clean. Some records suggest peasants bathed more regularly than nobles, who feared baths weakened their humors. Others claim bathing was so rare it was practically a special event, right up there with weddings and solar eclipses. In your case, it's best to assume once a month is ambitious. You step outside, feeling only slightly less filthy than when you woke up. The rising sun casts a grayish glow over the thatched rooftops and muddy road, and a chicken screams in the distance because even poultry are having a bad time in the 1300s. Your hands are cracked. Your breath smells like warm vinegar, and your body is somehow both sweaty and cold. But the day is just beginning. You've washed, more or less. Now it's time to find something to eat. Good luck. Your stomach grumbles, a low, hollow protest, and you know it's time to face the chamber pot of culinary experiences, medieval breakfast. But before you even think about food, you've got another bodily concern to address. And yes, it's exactly what you think it is. You need to go. Number 2. And unfortunately, your options are limited. In your tiny home, the chamber pot is still sitting exactly where you left it, half full, odoriferous, and deeply uninviting. But it's better than the alternative, braving the communal privy. So you weigh your options. Stay inside, hover precariously over a bowl that has no right to be reused, or venture out to the shared latrine, a wooden bench with 2 holes carved into it, suspended above a pit of doom that hasn't been emptied in. Well, no one really knows. You choose the outdoor route, mostly for the airflow. Stepping outside, the early morning mist clings to the village like an old cloak, and the ground squelches beneath your clogs with each step. The privy is just past the edge of the communal green, hidden behind a rickety screen of woven reeds meant to give the illusion of privacy. The structure itself leans slightly, like it's trying to escape its own stench. You pull aside the covering, and are greeted by a smell that can only be described as centuries of poor decisions. The seat is a plank of wood, worn smooth and slightly rotten, and there's no ventilation, no paper, and certainly no lock on the door. You're sharing this space with insects, the occasional rat, and possibly a ghost who died of embarrassment. If you're lucky, someone's left behind a scrap of linen or hay for wiping. If you're really lucky, no one will walk in while you're mid-squat. Medieval etiquette around privacy? Let's just say it's not a priority. Now, here's the kicker. This experience is better than what many people had. In rural areas, it wasn't unusual for folks to relieve themselves behind the nearest bush, in the barn, or even directly into the street's drainage channel, known as an open sewer. That's right, the same trench that collects rainwater also receives yesterday's dinner in reverse. In larger towns, these channels, called kennels or gutters, ran down the middle of the street. Some were lined with stones, but most were just muddy ditches filled with every human fluid you can imagine, and several you'd rather not. Cities stank. Like really stank. One visitor to 14th century London famously described the stench as overpowering to the very soul. No exaggeration. You finish your grim business, do what you can with what little wiping material you found, and step away quickly, mostly to escape the swarm of flies that have laid claim to the area. You make a mental note to never eat raisins again, just in case. The waste disposal system is simple. Let it fester. There's no sanitation department, no plumbing. Night soil, the polite term for human excrement, might be collected once in a while to be used as fertilizer. And yes, that means your future vegetables could have quite the earthy tang. Weird fact? Some medieval cities employed gong farmers, men, whose job was to climb down into cesspits and manually shovel out the filth. It paid well, but the risks were obvious: suffocation, drowning, or just losing the will to live. Historians still argue whether these laborers were respected for their vital role or simply tolerated like a necessary evil. With that horrific experience behind you, literally, you shuffle back toward your cottage. You're now deeply aware of the grime under your fingernails and the unique perfume that clings to your woolen tunic. But there's still no soap. You rinse your hands in the same wash basin from earlier, hoping the rainwater gods show mercy. And then finally, it's breakfast time. You sit at the rough-hewn table with your family, and someone hands you a piece of bread so hard it could double as a weapon. It's maslin bread, made from a mix of rye and barley, not because it tastes good, but because those were the cheapest grains available. It's dark, dense, and full of surprises. By surprises, we mean weevils. You take a cautious bite. It's not bad, but it's not great either. You pretend not to notice the tiny movement in the crust. Extra protein. Alongside your bread is a cup of small ale. a weak, low-alcohol beer that's safer to drink than water. Boiling during the brewing process killed most bacteria, so even children drank it. Cheers. It's 6 a.m. and you're already tipsy. Some mornings, there might be a bit of cheese or a leftover scrap of onion from last night, but there's no fruit, no jam, no coffee, especially no coffee. That won't make its way to Europe for another few centuries. Same with tea. And sugar? Forget it. That's the kind of rare spice nobles keep locked in chests, not something you sprinkle on your porridge. You chew in silence, listening to the distant braying of a donkey and the sniffling of your sibling, who's come down with the weekly cough again. Everyone has the cough. It's like a village subscription service. As you gnaw through your meal, you reflect on how much you miss even the most disappointing modern breakfast. Cold cereal, stale toast, airport eggs. They're all royal feasts compared to this. And now, fueled by stale bread and lukewarm beer, you're expected to begin your long, back-breaking day. But first, you've got to get dressed. Get ready. There are no zippers, no elastic, and definitely no fashion sense. Definitely no fashion. You stand from the table, stomach half full and entirely unsatisfied, and move toward the bundle of scratchy fabric folded in the corner. It's time to get dressed, if you can even call it that. Forget your comfy hoodie or your breathable gym shorts. This is the Middle Ages. Clothes aren't about self-expression. They're about surviving weather, filth, and social judgment. Mostly filth. Your outfit begins with a coarse linen shirt. Well, technically it's your only shirt. It's off-white. In theory, though, centuries of hand-washing in dirty water have aged it to the color of weak porridge. It's stiff in the wrong places and soft in none. You pull it over your head and try not to wince at the chill seeping through the damp fabric. There's no such thing as a dryer. Clothes are hung outside, no matter the weather, and dry is a generous term. Next comes the legwear, hose. Not pants, not leggings. Hose. Two separate tubes of itchy wool that cover your legs individually and tie at the waist with strings made from flax or, if you're lucky, leather. They sag constantly and make every step feel like your knees are being gently garroted. You try to lace them up evenly, but one slips mid-knot, and now your right leg is colder than your left. Perfect underwear. That's adorable. You don't get underwear, unless you're upper class, and even then it's more like a long linen tunic than anything close to modern briefs. So yes, you're going commando under wool. Good luck with that chafing. You reach for your tunic, a rough knee-length overgarment that hangs like a potato sack. It's dyed a dull brownish green, not for style, but because that's what you got when you boiled nettles and mud together. Maybe once it was vibrant. Now it blends in with everything, especially the ground. And speaking of the ground, footwear. You shove your aching feet into wooden clogs. Not cute Dutch ones with little carvings. No, these are thick slabs of wood, held together with leather straps that dig into your skin. No arch support, no padding, no mercy. On rainy days, they clog with mud. On dry days, they rub your heels raw. Either way, you're going to get a blister. Or 3. You try not to think about what's inside the clogs. Spoiler, it might be yesterday's toe sweat, maybe a beetle. You just hope it's not both. Some mornings, if it's especially cold, you might layer a second tunic or wear a hooded cowl over your head. But wool is expensive, and you've only got the one. Fashion, in your world, is purely functional. Colors are dictated by what's available locally, bright hues like blue or crimson. Forget it. Those require imported dyes or the crushing of very specific insects. Unless you're royalty, you're dressed in earth tones and disappointment. Now, here's a little-known gem. In many areas, sumptuary laws regulated who could wear what. That's right, laws about fashion. If you dared to dress above your station, you could be fined or worse. Historians still argue whether these laws were strictly enforced, but one thing is clear. Clothing wasn't just about warmth. It was about status. And you? You're screaming peasant from every frayed thread. You bend down to adjust your hose again because they've already started slipping and feel a sharp twinge in your lower back. Welcome to the daily ache. There are no belts, no buttons, and certainly no elastic waistbands. Everything ties, wraps, or flops. You finish dressing and immediately regret most of your choices, but you don't really have choices, do you? And let's not forget accessories. A small knife hangs from your belt, your one essential tool. It slices bread, cuts rope, cleans under your fingernails, and occasionally fends off rabid badgers. Jewelry? Maybe a wooden rosary bead or a crude iron ring if you're lucky. You've got no time for bling when you're living on turnips and prayers. Your hair is still tangled. You run a wooden comb through it once before the teeth snap, and you decide the bird's nest aesthetic is just part of the look now. Clean-shaven? Absolutely not. Razors are a luxury, and hot water is a wish. Most men keep a scraggly beard out of convenience. Women? If you're married, you'll be expected to cover your head with a wimple or kerchief, even indoors. No one wants to see your hair, it's immodest. Which, if you ask me, is ironic when half the village smells like a latrine. And here's a strange little detail to carry with you. Many people believe that wearing red prevented disease. So if you happen to spot someone in a red tunic, they might not be bold. They might just be scared. It's a medieval power color, like garlic, for vampires, or hand sanitizer. By now you're dressed, sort of warm and entirely uncomfortable. You glance around the room one last time. The fire is still out, the wind whistles through the wall cracks, and you're ready to start your day. Except remember, it's not your day, it's your Lord's day. And your job, your time, and your body? They all belong to Him. So straighten your tunic, adjust your clogs, and prepare to trudge into a world of labor, grime, and zero labor rights. You're headed outside and into the street. Trust me, it gets worse. The moment you step outside, your nose regrets it. The air greets you with a pungent blend of manure, wet dog, stale ale, and the uniquely sharp tang of rotting turnips. You pause, blinking in the daylight, and realize that this street, the one you're expected to walk through every day, is more compost heap than roadway. Welcome to your medieval neighborhood. The ground beneath your wooden clogs is a soggy mix of mud, animal dung, and mysterious puddles that may or may not be just water. The rain from 2 nights ago still hasn't drained. That's because there's no drainage system. Medieval towns were not built with plumbing or urban planning in mind. They were built because someone threw up a house, and then someone else did the same next door. You take a careful step forward and immediately skid a little. A pig ambles past, unconcerned, rooting around for breakfast in a pile of spoiled cabbage. That pig? It belongs to no one and everyone. Stray livestock are a feature, not a bug. Chickens flap about underfoot, dogs fight over bones, and somewhere, a goat is screaming, not in pain, just as a lifestyle choice. In towns and villages, refuse was simply tossed into the street. The morning ritual involved flinging yesterday's scraps, bones, spoiled stew, chamber pot contents, straight from the window. If you're lucky, someone shouts "Gardy Lou" before launching the contents. If not, you learn the hard way why medieval hats had wide brims. You hear the creak of a shutter and instinctively hug the wall, shielding your head. Nothing happens. False alarm. But the paranoia is justified. People regularly dump their waste right onto the footpath. No one thought twice about it. It was common, accepted, even expected. And the smell? It's thick. It doesn't hit you, it wraps around you, like a wet wool cloak soaked in sewage. You breathe through your mouth, which is somehow worse, and there's no escaping it. The street is your main artery to the fields, the church, the market, and it smells the same every single day. Now, for a quirky little detail. Many homes had jettying, upper floors that jutted out over the lower ones. This provided extra living space and, helpfully, reduced the splash radius of whatever was being tossed out of the windows. Generous, right? You pass by neighbors, most of whom are just as disheveled as you. The baker's wife nods sleepily. Her apron is already dusted in flour, her cheeks smudged with soot. The cobbler waves from his stoop, already hammering nails, into someone else's cracked shoe. Everyone's awake, everyone's tired, and no one smells great. You pause at a street corner and catch sight of the town crier. He's banging a bell and shouting something about a new tax. No one really listens. You already know what he's going to say. You owe money to someone with more land and fewer morals than you. Oh, and that loud sloshing you hear? That's the cesspit being agitated by a cartwheel. The entire town has one shared area where waste, rainwater, and whatever lives between them accumulate in a soupy mess. Sometimes it's called a midden. Sometimes it's just that cursed corner. Either way, you walk quickly past. You consider stepping off the road to avoid the latest slurry pile, but the alley is worse. Historians still argue whether medieval cities were truly as filthy as the most dramatic sources claim. Some say exaggeration, others say understatement. But for you, it's more than academic. It's soaking through your sock. Speaking of which, your clogs were never waterproof to begin with, and now they're full of squish. You try not to think about what's inside. Them, focusing instead on the sound of a nearby bell, church bells tolling the hour. That means it's nearly time for labor, and you'd better not be late. You pass a few wealthier homes along the way, stone instead of timber, tiled roofs instead of thatch. They even have glass in the windows, tiny diamond panes that shimmer in the sun. You don't know who lives there, but you know it's not you. And here's a little curiosity. Glass windows in the Middle Ages weren't transparent like today's. They were cloudy, distorted, and often greenish. Think fancy shower door. The rich had them. You had shutters. If you wanted light, you opened them. If you wanted warmth, you closed them. If you wanted both, tough luck. You near the town edge, where the building's thin and the smell shifts slightly. It's more open here, more rural, but still the path is lined with muck and the occasional corpse of a rat, or what was once a rat. You try not to look too closely. A man walks past you with a wheelbarrow full of leeks. He nods. You nod. No. One smiles. You're all just trying to survive. Another fun tidbit. People used to carry sprigs of herbs or flowers in their sleeves or collars to counteract the street stench. A little personal air filter, medieval style. You don't have any herbs. You hold your breath instead. As you reach the path toward your lord's field, you take one last look back at the village. The crooked roofs, the mud-slick streets, the fog hanging like a wet towel over the rooftops, and you sigh. Because now it's time for work. Back-breaking, relentless, soul-sapping work. Let's hope you didn't forget your hoe. You reach the edge of the village, and there it is, your workplace. It's not an office, it's not climate-controlled, and it doesn't have snacks in the break room. In fact, it is the break room. A wide, rocky field dotted with patches of stubborn weeds and yesterday's footprints in the mud. Your job? To till, weed, dig, hoe, haul, repeat, until your back gives out or the sun disappears, whichever comes first. You're a serf. That means you don't technically own anything. Not the hut you slept in, not the dirt beneath your feet, and certainly not your time. It all belongs to your local lord. Your role in the grand medieval ecosystem is simple. Keep his land productive and his granary full. And in exchange, you get, well, not much. A sliver of land for your own vegetables, protection from invaders, if they show up but don't get your hopes up, and the vague privilege of not being whipped today. You pick up your hoe, wooden, splintered, and definitely older than you, and trudge into the field. The soil is heavy and damp. Every swing of the tool sends a jolt up your arm and a squelch of mud onto your tunic. There's no tractor, no gloves, no ergonomic anything. Your body is the tool, and it's already exhausted. Fun fact, the average medieval peasant worked far more than modern humans, especially during peak farming seasons. Sunup to sundown wasn't poetic, it was literal. Your calendar revolved around planting and harvest with only a handful of holy days as breaks, and those usually required attending mass, fasting, or walking miles to a saint's shrine while nursing a blister the size of your thumb. As you bend and dig, you notice the ache forming in your lower spine. Again, you stretch, briefly, but there's no time to pause, fall behind, and the overseer might take notice. Or worse, the bailiff. He rides up and down the property on a horse that looks better fed than you, barking instructions and tracking productivity. You glance sideways and see a child, maybe 10, carrying a heavy basket of stones away from the field. There's no school, no soccer practice, no cartoons, just work. Children were expected to contribute as soon as they could walk straight while holding a bucket. Next to you, your neighbor grunts and coughs, wiping sweat from his brow with a sleeve that's already soaked. You nod to him. No words, just mutual suffering. A little community of sore shoulders and mutual back pain. The sun inches higher, turning the damp earth into a sticky, steaming mess. You swat at flies. They don't care about your suffering. They're here for the smell. Which, admittedly, you're starting to contribute to more and more by the minute. And just when you think you've settled into the rhythm of monotony, your hoe catches on something. Not a rock, not a root. Something. Round. You nudge the soil away with your foot and stare. It's a bone. You stare at it for a moment, unsure if it's animal or something more ominous. No one around you even looks up. Because honestly, it's not the first bone found in this field. Could be from last winter, could be older. Some medieval. Plots were layered over old graveyards, forgotten battlefields, or just former neighbors who were buried in shallow, unmarked spots. Historians still argue whether the typical peasant had any real fear of death, or if it was simply so constant that it became a dull background hum, like wind or the sound of bells. You dig a little deeper, shove the bone aside, and keep going. What else can you do? Now, for a weird little detail. Sometimes peasants had to work not only their lord's fields, but also the church's. That's right, double duty. The church owned vast swaths of land, and working those plots earned you exactly 0 coins, but plenty of grace points toward heaven. Probably. Maybe. Your arms are tired, your legs are tired, your soul is tired, and it's still mid-morning. You shift positions and try to ease the pressure on your back, but that only invites a new pain in your knees. There's no knee pad, no ibuprofen, no sports drink to keep you going. Just a leather flask with some warm ale inside and a bite of old cheese if you remembered to pack it. You didn't. A breeze picks up, but it's warm and full of pollen. You sneeze loudly and immediately. Regret it. Now your nose is running and your sleeve is your only tissue. Your eyes itch. You blink at the sun. It blinks back. Eventually, the overseer calls for a short break. You sit on a rock that pokes you in 3 separate places and try to massage your hands, now stiff from gripping the hoe's rough handle. Your palms are blistered. One might be bleeding. It'll get infected, probably. But you've got no choice. A bee buzzes past. You ignore it. A few moments of stillness are all you get before it's back to the dirt. Always the dirt. Back on your feet, you resume the endless dance of bend, lift, dig, bend, lift, dig. You don't even think anymore. Just survive. Because in the Middle Ages, rest isn't a right. It's a rumor. Its midday sun presses down like a smothering hand, and your tunic clings to your back with a clammy insistence. Sweat runs into your eyes, stings a little, but you barely flinch. You're too focused on not keeling over. That bite of weevil bread from earlier is long gone, and your stomach has started to make polite suggestions about passing out. You ignore it, because if you stop now, you might not start again. And honestly, you don't feel great. Your head's a little foggy, your limbs feel heavier than usual, and you're pretty sure your left armpit smells like it's plotting something. You push through it, because this is the Middle Ages, and not feeling great is just the default human condition. You take a moment to gulp from your leather flask, only to realize that the water inside is cloudy and smells vaguely like cabbage. Still, you sip. Because here's a grim little truth. Clean water is not guaranteed. Wells are often shallow, easily contaminated, and frequently shared with livestock. In urban areas, water might come from a river that also serves as the town's laundry basin, garbage chute, and informal fish graveyard. That's why so many people drink small ale or weak cider instead. Not to get tipsy, but to stay alive. The alcohol, as weak as it is, at least kills some of the bacteria. Too bad your ale's warm and slightly sour, having spent the entire morning sweating in a goat leather pouch. Still thirsty? Historians still argue whether medieval water was truly as dangerous as often claimed. Some suggest people knew how to find clean sources. Others believe most just rolled the dice and hoped their next sip wouldn't be their last. You've Just swallowed something with a texture. You don't ask what. You pause to wipe your forehead on your sleeve and notice a few red bumps on your arms. Could be bug bites, could be heat rash, could be that mysterious village illness going around. You know the one. The summer fever that starts with chills and ends with a funeral. Everyone's talking about it in whispers, like if they say the word out loud, it'll crawl into their ears. Nearby, a woman sneezes 3 times in a row, wipes her nose on her apron, and goes back to digging potatoes. No one says anything. No one offers help. There's nothing to be done. Because medicine in your time is a deeply chaotic affair. You've got 3 basic options. A village wise woman who offers a concoction of dried herbs and whispered prayers. A barber surgeon who might bleed you with a rusty knife while shouting at an apprentice. Or the church, which offers absolution, holy water, and a firm reminder that your suffering builds character and possibly earns you less time in purgatory. And if that doesn't work? Well, there's always the leech method, or the toad in a sock method, or the tried and true cover it with mud and ignore it method. Fun fact, one real medieval treatment for stomach pain was powdered bezoar stone, basically a lump of undigested hair and minerals found in a goat's intestine. It was prized like gold, sometimes more than gold, because when you've got nothing else, goat guts seem like a reasonable option. You rub your temples, which is hard because your hands are filthy. Your fingernails are black with dirt. Your wrists are streaked with grime. And your left elbow itches in a way that makes you suspicious. But there's no break in sight, and the sun won't set for hours. And now, the flies are back. They buzz around your face, land on your neck, investigate your ear canal like they're on a guided tour. You swat, they dodge, and you consider whether sainthood is possible through sheer endurance. The smell doesn't help. You're sweating through your wool, but it's not just your stink. It's everyone else's too, and the manure in the field. And the neighbor who hasn't washed in what feels like a religious protest. Personal space is a myth. Hygiene is aspirational. A moment later, a dog runs past, dragging a rotten fish. You can't be sure if it was stolen from someone's dinner or exhumed from the compost pile. Either way, it's gone. The dog wins. Still, you keep working. Because if you don't meet your quota, if you don't turn this rocky patch into something vaguely food-shaped, your lord may take your harvest or fine you, or both. And if your personal garden doesn't yield enough to feed your family come winter, well, let's not think about that right now. As you shift your grip on the hoe, the splinter from earlier finally works its way under your skin. You hiss quietly, pull your hand back, and inspect the damage. A thin, angry line of red is already forming around the splinter. You try to dig it out with a dirty fingernail, because that's your only option. There's no tweezers, no bandage, and certainly no antibiotic cream. If it gets worse, you'll have to find the wise woman and pray she's not experimenting with goose dung again. You look up at the sky, watching a single bird wheel overhead. For a moment, you envy its distance, its freedom, its complete lack of festering rashes. Then it poops in your direction, and you remember nature isn't always on your side. By late afternoon, your legs feel like firewood, stiff, dry, and just waiting to snap. You've taken roughly 40,000 steps without realizing it. Your knuckles are swollen, your neck is sunburned, and you can't remember the last time you blinked without tasting salt. But you're still standing. Sort of, which, in this era, qualifies as success. You lean on your hoe for a moment, just long enough to feel your arms start to tremble from holding still. The irony. Resting now hurts almost as much as working. And just when you think this day couldn't get more humbling, you remember something. You're not just poor. You're not just tired. You're a serf. That means you don't work for your lord. You belong to him. Your cottage, your meager garden plot, the tools you labor with, even your body in a roundabout, depressingly legal sense, are all tied to his land. It's not quite slavery, but it's also not freedom. You can't move away without permission. You can't marry without paying a fee. You definitely can't strike for better hours or working conditions unless you fancy getting chained to a post. You are, quite literally, part of the property. Feudalism is the system you're trapped in, a kind of social pyramid with the king at the top, and you flattened under a rock near the bottom. The hierarchy is rigid. Kings own everything, but they hand land out like party favors to nobles. Nobles hand it to knights. Knights hand it to minor lords. And minor lords, lucky you, hand it to people like you in return for eternal loyalty, endless labor, and a yearly gift of chickens. Yes, that's a real thing. Chickens were the default medieval currency for most serfs. You couldn't afford silver, but you might be able to bribe your way out of a tax with eggs, or butter, or a really good wheel of cheese, but don't get any ideas. Everything you grow still legally belongs to your lord. If your harvest fails, you're starving. If your harvest succeeds, he takes the first and best portion. You get what's left, usually shriveled carrots, wormy cabbage, and potatoes with trust issues. You hear the creak of saddle leather and glance up. That's your lord, or one of his stewards, riding along the road, inspecting the fields like he planted every seed himself. He doesn't wave. He never waves. But you bow slightly, out of instinct, because not bowing could be considered insolence, and insolence is punished. Sometimes with a fine, sometimes with stocks, sometimes with a very public beating to set an example. You remind yourself not to make eye contact. Here's a quirky bit of medieval logic. Even though you work like a mule, every day, you still owe labor dues. That's a formal term for extra work the Lord can demand at will. Repairing his fence, digging his moat, helping rethatch the roof of his granary. Think of it as overtime, unpaid, unscheduled, and unskippable. Historians still argue whether serfs were universally miserable or just quietly resigned to the system. Some records suggest villagers took pride in their work, clung to a sense of community, and didn't expect life to be any different. Others read the complaints in court rolls, the occasional revolts, the whispered curses carved into stone thresholds, and paint a grimmer picture. Speaking of grim, if you have a daughter, the Lord has certain rights. One of the most infamous is droit du seigneur, the alleged right of a noble to sleep with a serf's bride on her wedding night. Most historians agree it's probably more myth than law, but the fear lingered all the same. Power dynamics in the Middle Ages weren't subtle. You take a break near the hedgerow, rubbing your aching neck, and notice a line of ants trailing across a stone. Even they seem to have more freedom of movement than you. Your thoughts drift. What, if you could leave? Run away? Start fresh in a neighboring town where no one knows your name? Well, technically, you could. But if you're caught, you'll be dragged back in chains and probably punished publicly. Runaways were considered stolen property, and the only thing worse than being a serf is being a criminal serf. You've heard rumors of people fleeing to the forests, joining outlaw bands, living free beneath the trees. But that fantasy comes with wolves, starvation, and a life expectancy of until next winter. Besides, if your absence is noticed, and it will be, your family suffers. The Lord won't punish you alone. He'll punish everyone who depends on you. You pick up your hoe again and go back to work. A bee buzzes past. You don't even flinch anymore. A neighboring farmer sneezes 5 times in a row and mutters a prayer. You make the sign of the cross, just in case. No one wants to catch whatever he's got. You still remember last year's bad wind that took 6 villagers and 2 cows. By late afternoon, your shoulders are shaking. Not from emotion, just from exhaustion. You're hot, sore, and the blisters on your palms have formed a union. But the sun is dipping, and that means soon, finally, it's time to stop working your Lord's land. And start working your own, because that's the deal. You give the best hours of the day to someone else, and only afterward do you get to sow the seeds that might keep you alive. You sigh, pick up your tools, and trudge toward your garden, shoulders low, spirit lower. The day is far from over. Evening's approaching, and while the gold light might look romantic in a modern Instagram post here in your world, it simply means you're running out of daylight to tend your patch of earth. You drag yourself away from the Lord's field, past the stone marker that divides his property from the narrow strip you're allowed to call your own. This is your croft. A modest garden, maybe a few scraggly rows of turnips and beans, a patch for leeks if you're lucky. If you're really lucky, The local deer haven't eaten half of it while you were too busy harvesting someone else's. Grain. You're not here to relax. You're here to survive. Because while working your Lord's land is mandatory, working your own land is essential. This is what feeds you, what carries you through winter, what fills the thin stew you'll slurp. Down by candlelight, the tomatoes in your sandwich? They won't exist for centuries. The bread? Still mostly weevil. But this small plot? It's the difference between hungry and starving. You begin by pulling weeds, aggressive, root-deep ones that wrap around your beans like they're trying to kill them. The soil is stubborn, the sun is slipping, and your hands are already torn up from the day. Every tug sends a ripple of pain through your arms, but you keep going. You always keep going, and let's be clear, this isn't a cozy hobby garden. There are no cute tools or raised beds, no time for chatting about heirloom varieties. You're working with a wooden spade that cracks slightly every time it hits a buried rock. You bend, pull, dig, sweat, and repeat. Your stomach growls. You haven't eaten since the crust of bread this morning, and that warm ale is long gone. Your body burns through calories like it's in a survival reality show, and spoiler, you didn't win. A neighbor passes by, pulling a squeaky cart of beets. You nod. No one says much this late. Words are expensive when your muscles feel like wet twine and your bones have turned into decorative gravel. You lean over your cabbages and try to assess their condition. One has been nibbled. Another is turning soft at the base. You frown. Could be worms, could be rot. Either way, it's not going on the table anytime soon. And just in case things weren't difficult enough, there's always the tithe. Yes, that's right. You owe 10% of everything you grow to the church. Your leeks, tithed. Your eggs, tithed. Your half-dead goose that limps sideways, still gets tithed. The church doesn't miss its cut. There's a nice barn by the chapel that stores all the donations, and while your children chew stale roots for dinner, the parish priest enjoys imported figs from a gift basket sent by the bishop. Allegedly. Historians still argue whether the tithe was universally enforced or simply feared into compliance. Some areas were lenient, others had enforcers who would march door to door with scales and a helpful reminder that God is always watching. And God, apparently, likes turnips. You briefly contemplate hiding your better vegetables behind the hut. Everyone does it, but then you remember old Tom. He tried that last year. The steward found his stash and confiscated not only the produce, but also his cooking pot. The stew that night was boiled in a helmet. As the light fades further, you grab a small wooden pail and check your chicken coop. 2 eggs. One's warm. You nearly weep. These eggs are gold. Protein, rare, and precious. You pocket them carefully. In your apron, cradling them like sacred artifacts. A weird medieval tidbit. Some peasants believed placing eggs under the hearth protected the house from evil spirits. You consider it briefly, then remember. You are the evil spirit after 14 hours of labor and no dinner. Back in the garden, your younger sibling is picking dandelion greens. Not for decoration, for soup. Everything is food if you're desperate. Enough. Leaves, snails, questionable mushrooms. You hope they're mushrooms. You glance at them, sun setting behind their hunched silhouette, and feel a brief pang of warmth. Not joy exactly, just the flicker of family amidst all this. A sudden breeze kicks up, rattling the dry stalks. You shiver. Summer days can end cold, and you're still damp from sweat. Your tunic clings to you like regret. There's no change of clothes. You'll sleep in this. The last of the daylight blinks out as you gather your tools. The wooden spade, the rusty trowel, your own aching hands. You whisper a half prayer, part habit, part insurance policy. Because one bad frost, one lost harvest, one hoof rot in your pig, and your whole family starves. You straighten slowly, knees creaking, spine rebelling. Your fingers smell like soil and onions. You walk back toward your cottage, lit faintly by the candle stub in the window. Dinner awaits. Sort of. But before you reach the door, a neighbor calls your name. Their goats wandered into your plot again. And tomorrow? Tomorrow you start this all over. Because rest is for saints. and saints are already dead. You make it back to the cottage just as the last shred of daylight slips behind the trees, leaving everything tinged with that shadowy blue-gray stillness that announces, you're on your own now. Inside, the single room feels warmer than it did this morning, not because it's actually warm, but because you've lowered your expectations. The hearth has a small flame crackling beneath a pot that smells faintly of cabbage, mystery herbs, and desperation. Someone has stirred in a bit of barley, maybe even a slice of dried carrot if you've had a really generous trade this week. This is dinner. Don't get excited. You lower yourself to the bench, every muscle protesting. Across the table, your sibling is already chewing a hunk of bread with slow determination, like it might magically taste better if you give it enough time. You're pretty sure that loaf started its career 2 days ago as roof insulation. And then there's the gruel. Oh, the gruel. A thin, pale, oatmeal-adjacent slurry ladled into a rough wooden bowl. You blow on it hoping to cool it down, but it's already lukewarm. It always is. The texture is somehow both gluey and watery. The taste is, well, it's hard to describe a flavor that doesn't exist. Mostly it tastes like wet wood and resignation. You dip a crust of bread into it because you saw a noble do that once and figured it might help. It doesn't. It just makes the bread slimier. You chew anyway. There's no seasoning. Salt is expensive, pepper is worth more than gold, and your only spice is hope. Once in a while, you might add a lump of cheese to the mix, but it's not the kind that comes in plastic wrap. This cheese sweats, it crumbles, it sometimes moves on its own. But you scrape off the worst bits and call it a delicacy. Mold builds character, right? And meat? Ha! Funny. Meat is a luxury. Something you might see at a festival, a feast day, or if one of your chickens dies suddenly and you're quick enough to cook it before it goes suspiciously limp. Most of the time, protein comes from beans, eggs, or the occasional sliver of salt pork that's been boiled so often it tastes more like the pot than the pig. You finish your bowl of gruel and set it down with a quiet sigh. No one says anything. Talking wastes energy. And honestly, what's there to say? Yum isn't on the menu. Now here's a weird little truth. Even in these simple meals, class division is painfully obvious. While you're chewing on stale, barley paste, your lord is upstairs in his manor dining on roast goose, spiced wine, honeyed fruits, and maybe even imported figs if he's showing off. You've heard rumors of pies with actual fillings, gravy, custards, things you've only seen in your dreams, or nightmares depending on how your stomach reacts. Historians still debate whether the medieval diet was quite as grim as we think. Some suggest peasants had decent nutrition from whole grains, legumes, and fresh produce. Others point out that famine, parasites, and food spoilage were constant threats that turned even the best intentions into a roulette of diarrhea and divine intervention. And then there's the bread again. Every meal features bread. You eat it in the morning, dunk it in soup at night, and occasionally use it as a plate. No joke. Trenchers were thick slabs of stale bread used to hold stew, then either eaten or given to the poor. You're the poor, so you just eat the trencher. Eventually. Sometimes 2 days later, when it's finally soft enough to chew without losing a molar. You light a candle from the hearth and let it flicker weakly in the corner. Candlelight is precious. It's made from animal fat, smells like feet, and melts faster than you can afford. But it keeps the shadows at bay. Kind of. A rat scurries along the wall and disappears behind the chest where your few spare possessions live. You don't even flinch. Rats are part of the furniture, just like the draft that hisses through the wall cracks and the constant creak of the beams above your head. It's your house. It's alive. In all the worst ways. Someone coughs. The same cough from earlier. It rattles through the silence like a warning bell. You glance over, but no one says anything. Again, what's there to do? You've got no medicine. Just rest, broth, and the occasional herbal poultice if the wise woman hasn't run out of nettles. You remember when your neighbor had that cough? He said it was nothing. A week later, they were digging a shallow grave behind the chapel. The room grows quieter as you settle in for the evening. Everyone shuffles to their respective corners. No bedrooms, just shared space. You all sleep within arm's reach of one another. Children, siblings, even the occasional goat if the weather's bad enough. You lie on the straw-stuffed mattress, still in your clothes, too tired to care that your feet are filthy and your back itches where the tunic is damp. The straw pokes through the sackcloth. There are fleas, and something just nibbled your ankle. You sigh again. At least you're indoors. At least it's not raining, and at least, for now, you've made it through. The day, tomorrow, you do it all again. The flickering candle finally gutters out, and the cottage sinks into that thick medieval darkness, the kind that feels like a wool blanket wrapped around your head. You close your eyes, hoping for sleep, but instead, you hear bells. Church bells again. They've already rung 4 times today. Once at dawn, then midday, then evening prayers, and now again, for Compline, the final call to worship before sleep. In your exhausted haze, the sound is more annoying than divine. But for the people of your time, it's the heartbeat of daily life. The church isn't just a building down the road. It's everything. It owns land, dictates laws, collects taxes, and controls more of your life than your own parents ever did. It tells you when to work, when to fast, when to rest, and even when to sin, because they'll be ready to collect penance right after. You shift on your mattress, trying not to roll into someone else's elbow, and stare up into the thatched blackness above. You're thinking about the sermon from last week. You didn't understand much of it. It was in Latin, and you only know about 15 Latin words, most of them insults shouted by the steward. But the gist was clear. You're a sinner. Everyone is. Always. Every thought, every slip, every little moment of joy is one step closer to eternal damnation. You're told not to question it. The priest is your spiritual shepherd, the only one allowed to interpret Scripture. You, on the other hand, are advised to shut up and cross yourself. And maybe bring a chicken next time because the roof needs mending. Fun fact, some churches kept reliquaries, decorated boxes supposedly holding the bones of saints or splinters of the true cross. People traveled miles to pray beside them. Your local chapel has a tooth in a jar. Maybe it's from a saint. Maybe it's from an unlucky pig. No one's really sure. Historians still argue how deeply the average peasant believed the doctrines they heard weekly. Some say faith was absolute. Others suggest it was more about routine, fear, and a vague sense that bad things happen if you skip Mass. And you never skip Mass. Not unless you want trouble. On Sundays and holy days, you wear your slightly less filthy tunic and sit through long, mumbled prayers and processions. You don't kneel on padded pews. There are no pews. Just cold stone floors. Or if you're lucky, a rotting wooden bench. You sit, you stand, you kneel, you stand again. All while trying to remember which sins you committed that week, and whether you should be whispering about them to the priest or quietly pretending they never happened, and that's just the public face of the church. Behind the scenes, things get more complicated. Take indulgences, for example. A fee you can pay to reduce time in purgatory. Yes, that's right. You can buy forgiveness. Salvation, a la carte. The wealthier villagers occasionally pay for entire family trees to be blessed into the afterlife. You? You're lucky if your tithe buys you one less flame under your feet. And let's not forget the fear of heresy. Express the wrong opinion, say, suggest the priest might be skimming grain off the top of the tithe barn, and suddenly you're suspicious. Too many suspicions, and next thing you know, you're being tried for blasphemy, or worse, sorcery. The only real difference is how long the priest stares at you while you burn. You roll onto your side, listening to the soft breathing of your family. In the corner, someone mumbles in their sleep. You try to settle, but your mind keeps buzzing, like a wasp stuck in your thoughts. You remember that time the monk visited your village. The one who said a bell must ring every time someone yawns in church to scare the devil away. He claimed the devil slips into your soul through your open mouth. You didn't believe it then, and you don't believe it now. But the sound of the bell still echoes in your memory every time you yawn, and don't even get started on saints. There's a saint for everything. Lost keys, not that you own keys. sore throats, farming tools, and even boils. You once heard of a saint who survived by eating nothing but dew and sunlight. You tried that once for a day. It ended in dizziness and a very angry goat. But belief isn't optional. Whether you're deeply faithful or just playing along, the church's grip on your daily life is absolute. They decide what's good, what's bad, what's allowed, and what gets you dunked in a pond to see if you float like a witch. You let your eyes close again. Maybe tomorrow you'll light a candle at the chapel. Maybe not. You can't really afford it. And besides, you've got enough to worry about, like not dying of hunger or infection. Still, you whisper a tiny prayer, not because you think it'll work, but because just in case it doesn't, you're already living the warm-up act to hell. To hell. The morning comes again, not with sunlight, not with birdsong, but with a bleeding goat that stuck its head through your window and is chewing on your sleeve. You sit up slowly, your spine cracking like firewood, and realize something else. You're a woman in the Middle Ages, which means somehow your day is already harder than it was yesterday. Let's be clear, if you're female in this world, congratulations, you've won a front row seat to centuries of condescension, poor, medical advice, and cultural blame. Your duties include childbearing, animal feeding, vegetable boiling, herb gathering, bread baking, fire stoking, fabric mending, floor sweeping, husband tending, neighbor avoiding, and occasionally defending your soul against accusations of witchcraft. And if you're unmarried, even better. That means you're seen as suspicious, tempting, or a burden, possibly all three. You slide into your tunic, not because you want to, but because it's the only one you have. You tie your hair back with a scrap of cloth and cover it with a wimple. That's not fashion, that's regulation. Married women must keep their hair hidden. Visible hair is a sin, apparently, and can cause men to stumble into lust, which, of course, would be your fault. Now you're ready for the day. Almost. First, someone needs help delivering a baby. It's your neighbor who's been in labor since last night. No hospitals, no anesthetic, no trained professionals. Just a few. Women from the village, a basin of warm water, a length of torn linen, and a whole lot of screaming. You're not a midwife, but you've helped before, because in this world, birth is everyone's business. You rush over and find her lying on a bed of rags, panting, hair plastered to her forehead. Her husband waits outside, wringing his hands. He's not allowed in. Birth is women's work, messy and dangerous, sometimes deadly. You help hold her upright as she pushes. Hours pass. Time means nothing. The room is hot, the air thick, the tension unbearable. You whisper prayers under your breath, not because they help, but because there's nothing else to do. Finally, the baby comes. It's small, blue, silent. Everyone freezes, then it wails. Everyone exhales. You wrap it quickly in a cloth. Swaddle. Pass it to the mother who's too tired to hold it properly. She's bleeding more than she should. You press linen to her side and say her name, again and again. There's nothing more you can do. This is medieval childbirth. High risk, low reward, and no epidurals. Roughly 1 in 3 women die in childbirth across their lifetimes. There are no sterile instruments, no disinfectant, just herbs, luck, and prayers. And even if the mother survives, there's no guarantee. The child will. Infant mortality is brutal. 1 in 4 babies doesn't survive past their first birthday. They're baptized immediately. Not because it's cute, but because if they die without it, their soul is in limbo forever. Or so you're told. Historians still argue whether this constant proximity to death made medieval people numb to it or just quietly resigned. Maybe both. All you know is, when you walk back to your cottage, your hands are still stained with someone else's blood. And now, time to cook. Yes, after the birthing, the praying, and the quiet panic, you still have to boil a stew. The men have returned from the fields and they're hungry. You grind barley with a worn stone, slice onions with a dull knife, toss in a bone if one's available. You stir until your arms hurt, then serve it in the same bowl you used yesterday and the day before. Someone mentions that a cousin was caught reading. Reading. A woman. Apparently, she found a monk's discarded manuscript and tried to sound it out. Someone saw her, told the steward. And now there's talk she'll be spoken to, because female literacy is dangerous. It leads to questioning, and questioning leads to rebellion. You nod. You say nothing. But later, when you're alone, you mouth the Latin alphabet carved into the side of your bench. Just once. Just to remember how it sounds. A strange little fact. Some medieval scholars believed reading too much would cause a woman's uterus to wander. Literally. They thought it would detach and float around the body, causing all manner of ailments from melancholy to migraines. The only cure? Marriage and regular marital activity. Of course. If you're lucky enough to be literate, and that's very rare, it's usually because you're in a nunnery. But even there, the rules are tight. You can't write anything controversial. You can't lead prayer. You definitely can't preach. Your place is still under male authority. Just with slightly more books and less manure. Even as a nun, your body isn't entirely your own. You're expected to fast, mortify the flesh, deny vanity. In some orders, women wore hair shirts, garments designed to itch and irritate the skin, as a form of pious suffering. Because why be comfortable when you can be holy and itchy? You try to shake these thoughts as you peel a turnip. The sun is dipping again. Another day nearly done. Another ache in your back. Another stain on your apron. You sit quietly, staring at the fire. Your fingers twitch with the memory of holding that baby. You're not sure if the mother survived. No one said. All you know is, tomorrow it will happen again, and maybe the next time, it will be you. You wake with a jolt, not from a dream, but from shouting outside your window. That's never a good sign. Someone's in trouble. You throw on your tunic and rush outside with the rest of your sleepy, barefoot neighbors. There in the square are two men holding a third between them, arms pinned. A steward on horseback surveys the scene with the smug expression of someone who knows he'll never have to dig a latrine again. Apparently, the man being held, Tom the tanner's son, insulted a tax collector. Or maybe he just didn't bow low enough. The details are already murky. But what's clear is this. The law doesn't bend in your favor. Ever. They drag Tom toward the stocks. The stocks, you've noticed, are always ready. No repairs needed. No rust. Like they're greased with anticipation. Tom struggles, but only a little. He knows how this works. The wooden device clamps around his wrists and ankles, leaving him immobile in the middle of the village where everyone can see him. Stew and shame and rain and possibly poultry waste. A few people spit. Others look away. You stare just long enough to remind yourself what not to do. In the Middle Ages, you don't need to commit a crime to be punished. You just need to inconvenience the wrong person. Justice is less about fairness and more about reminding everyone who's in charge. There's no police force, no appeal process. Law is enforced by local lords and their thugs, often on a whim. If your village is lucky, you have a reeve, a kind of peasant sheriff. If not, the steward handles things, and his methods range from indifferent to creatively cruel. Today's offense, a mild insult. Tomorrow, theft, or debt, or just looking like you're about to cause trouble. Fun fact, in some towns, trial by ordeal was still a thing. If you were accused of a crime, and there was no proof, they'd test your innocence, using very logical methods like walking barefoot across hot plowshares, holding a red-hot iron bar, being dunked in a pond, if you floated. You were guilty, because witches float, obviously. Historians still argue how often these methods were actually used versus how often they were threatened to keep people quiet. Either way, the fear was real. You head back to your cottage, stomach uneasy. You haven't done anything wrong, at least not today, but you still feel vulnerable. Because here, the line between innocent and in trouble is thinner than the broth you had for dinner. Later that morning, while tending to your chores, you hear a commotion again. This time it's a woman. She's shouting about her husband's death, claiming the blacksmith sold her a cursed horseshoe that killed her cow. Someone mutters the word witch. It's low but audible. Others pick it up. You stop what you're doing. Witchcraft isn't taken lightly. In fact, it's not even well understood. Almost anything can be called witchcraft. Herbal remedies, unusual dreams, knowing Latin, talking to yourself, having a mole in the wrong place, or even just being alone too often. In the worst cases, accused witches are put on trial, and by trial we mean coerced confession and painful questions. Ducking, pressing, that's the one with heavy stones, or solitary confinement in a very damp cellar. Is it rare? Mostly. But the fear spreads like smoke, and if the church gets involved, things escalate. Fast. One strange tidbit. In some areas, if your field yielded too much grain, your neighbors might get suspicious. Too much success was suspicious, because clearly you didn't earn it. You must have used something unnatural, a potion, a demon, maybe a pact made at the crossroads under a new moon. You try to shake off the thoughts as you collect firewood. Keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your tunic clean. That's your rule. That's how you stay off the steward's radar. And speaking of the steward, he's back, riding down the main path like he owns the horizon. His men follow behind, laughing, their boots caked in cleaner mud than yours. They stop outside the tavern, demand drinks, demand taxes, demand respect. You glance sideways at them as you pass. Big mistake. One of them makes a crude joke. The others laugh. You force a polite nod. Keep walking. Inside, your heart races. You did nothing wrong. But again, that doesn't matter. Even day-to-day living is riddled with tiny legal traps. Could you afford the market toll? Did you step into the Lord's forest to gather wood? That's poaching, by the way. Yes, even fallen branches can be theft. You once heard of a boy punished for stealing a handful of peas. Just a few. The cost? A public whipping and 2 days in the pillory. Not because of the peas, but because of the principle. Punishment in this world isn't about justice. It's about display. About proving that the law is watching you, even when it doesn't make sense. By nightfall, Tom is still in the stocks. Someone's thrown a rotten apple at his shoulder. You sneak over with a cup of water and pass it to him without a word. He nods, grateful, but also ashamed. You walk back slowly, knowing full well, next time it could be you. It's festival day, not a holiday in the way you think of it. No lazy mornings, no iced drinks, no novelty t-shirts that say, "I survived the harvest fair." This is more like a pressure valve for an overworked, underfed community. A brief, chaotic swirl of sound, smell, and questionable decisions jammed between seasons of relentless labor, and today, you're required to show up. Again. You drag yourself into a tunic that doesn't smell too much like goat. Grab a coin or two if you have them, and make your way into the village square. There's music, kind of. A man with a hurdy-gurdy grinds out a tuneless melody while a boy hits a drum like it owes him money. Children dart between stalls, sticky with honey or soot or possibly both. This is supposed to be fun. And sure, there's an energy here. People laughing, dancing, playing strange games that mostly involve hitting each other with sticks. For a brief moment, the air feels lighter, almost joyful. Someone hands you a piece of roasted onion on a stick. You take it and it's warm. That's all you can ask for. But then you reach the center of the square. There's a crowd gathered around a wooden post. A bear, chained by the neck, paces back and forth. Next to it, a man in a jester's hood waves to the crowd. It's time for bear baiting, one of medieval Europe's most beloved and horrifying pastimes. The bear roars. A pack of dogs is released. People cheer. You turn away. Medieval entertainment is nothing if not vivid. If you're lucky, today's festivities will also include a tooth-pulling demonstration, no anesthesia, lots of blood, a puppet show about damnation with bonus fart jokes, a man who claims to swallow swords, or at least sharp sticks, and someone falling into the well after drinking too much ale. Festivals are often tied to religious events, saints' feast days, solstices, or the day your local church finally finished fixing its leaky roof. They're also a social mixer, a trade opportunity, and let's be honest, a massive gossip session. Everyone's here, everyone's watching, and if you're thinking this is a break from work, think again. You still have to cook. You still have to haul water. And if your family runs a stall or has chickens to trade, you're on your feet shouting about eggs for 12 hours while trying not to get trampled by a juggler. Still, you try to enjoy it. A little. You sip from a shared wooden mug of ale, slightly better than your usual batch. You watch a local band attempt a dance that ends with someone's shoe flying off into the priest's leg. That earns a full minute of shocked silence before the laughter explodes. Even the priest chuckles, though he immediately reminds everyone to come to confession on Sunday. Historians still debate whether these events were more community bonding or morality erosion. They were meant to celebrate saints, yes, but also included gambling, public drunkenness, and a frankly terrifying number of pies thrown at people's heads. You catch sight of a few wealthier villagers wearing bright imported cloth, rich blues, deep reds. Sumptuary laws technically prohibit lower classes from wearing those colors, but the rules are rarely enforced unless someone gets too bold. One girl in a yellow headscarf is already getting side-eye from the steward. Sumptuary laws were designed to keep people in their place, literally and visually. Fashion was tied to class. Certain fabrics, cuts, and even shoelace patterns were reserved for the elite. Step out of line, and you could be fined or publicly shamed. So you keep your tunic drab, your belt simple, your sleeves plain. You join a game involving a wheelbarrow, a chicken, and no clear rules. You lose, somehow. The chicken seems pleased. Then it's time for the main event, the mystery play. On a crude wooden stage, amateur actors in masks perform a Bible story, loosely. Today's feature, Jonah and the Whale. But the whale is clearly a large painted barrel with fins, and Jonah is just the miller's apprentice in an itchy beard. Still, the crowd loves it. Especially when Jonah gets swallowed, and the entire cast collapses in laughter at the noise he makes going in. You smile, genuinely. Because even in this muddy, painful, chaotic world, humor survives. Jokes about saints, about devils, about your Lord's very punchable face. Satire is alive and well. Just keep it quiet if it gets too pointed. As dusk falls, torches are lit. Couples sneak off toward the fields. Someone starts singing, someone else vomits near the cider barrel. A minor fight breaks out over a rigged game of dice. The stocks are prepared, just in case. You step back watching it all unfold. It's noisy, smelly, slightly dangerous, and it's the most alive your village has seemed in weeks. You walk home slowly, past dancing shadows and drunken laughter, a smear of soot on your cheek, a scrap of bread in your pocket. You'll still rise at dawn tomorrow. Still dig, still cook, still ache. But tonight, you saw a barrel pretend to be a whale. And somehow that's enough. It's another morning. You know, because your joints ache and the rooster is yelling again. You stretch your arms, blink into the smoky light seeping through the crooked shutter, and wonder briefly if you slept at all. Today's first task? Breakfast. You fish out the last chunk of your hard 2-day-old bread and chew it slowly. It tastes like wood and memories. There's a bit of sour cheese to go with it. Still edible, though the color has started to turn ambiguous. You wash it down with water. That might be safer than usual, but still smells like the bucket it came in. And now, you have to ask yourself a painful question. What's for dinner? It's time to think ahead. Because in this world, if you're not preparing food, you're probably not eating it. You head out to check your food stores. A small chest near the hearth that's technically your pantry, refrigerator, and cupboard combined. Inside are a few onions already sprouting, some barley, a dried fish that looks older than you, a tiny jar of lard you're guarding like it's sacred relic. Not much, but that's your reality. Because dinner isn't a meal, it's a negotiation. With scarcity, you gather ingredients and start preparing a stew. Water, barley, maybe some herbs you foraged, nettle, parsley, whatever hasn't been peed on by goats. If you're lucky, you'll scrounge up a root vegetable that hasn't rotted entirely. Carrots? More like carrot-shaped wood. There's a reason the medieval diet was so repetitive. Most meals were built around porridge, gruel, or soup, and yes, there's a difference. Porridge is thicker. Gruel is sadder. Soup is a wild card that depends on how much water you're willing to part with. Meat? Don't even start. You remember the last time you had meat? A festival feast, a real one. Your cousin's pig was slaughtered, and everyone got a bite. You're pretty sure the piece you ate was mostly fat and cartilage, but it still felt like Christmas, your birthday, and surviving a siege all rolled into one. Back then, meat was special. A privilege. Most days you eat what the land gives you, which is usually leafy, gritty, or shaped like a disappointment. You've heard of nobles dining on roast swan, duck and saffron, whole pies filled with birds that fly out when you open them. They have kitchens, ovens, spice chests, servants. You have a pot, a stick, and a handful of garlic so shriveled it looks like an artifact. And speaking of spices, they're expensive. Really expensive. Black pepper could be weighed against gold. Cinnamon, exotic, ginger, practically witchcraft. The average peasant might have access to mustard seed, wild garlic, or maybe dill, but mostly, you just hope the onions cover up the taste of everything else. Historians still debate whether peasants ate as poorly as we think. Some argue the diet was hearty, vegetable-rich, even nutritionally balanced, in a rustic, chew-this-tree-bark-for-fiber sort of way. Others point to famine records, skeletal remains with signs of malnutrition, and food riots that broke out when even the gruel ran out. Because famine is always lurking. A bad harvest, a long winter, a cow that drops dead mysteriously, one pest, outbreak, one unlucky storm, and your pantry goes from bare to hauntingly silent. You start a fire and place your pot over the flame. It takes forever to boil. You use bellows to stoke the coals, hands red from heat, eyes stinging from smoke. The chimney only half works, and your kitchen now smells like someone lit a stew in a tire fire. Eventually, the stew thickens. You taste it. It tastes like hot. You add more herbs. Still hot. You stir slowly, humming a song you half remember from your grandmother. It's about a rabbit who outsmarts a fox. You're not sure how it ends. Probably with the rabbit becoming stew. A strange little tidbit. Some peasants baked their bread at communal ovens. Once or twice a week, families brought their dough to the village oven, paid a small fee, and picked up the results. But if you baked at home and forgot to tie the portion to the church or manor, you could be fined. Because even bread had bureaucracy. You take the stew off the fire, set it aside to cool, and try to ignore the puddle of drool forming on the floor. Whether it's yours or the dog's is unclear. Later, you'll gather your family around the fire, and everyone will eat from the same bowl. No individual plates, no forks, just fingers, wooden spoons, and the polite understanding that the last bite goes to whoever's hungriest or fastest. You've become very fast. As night falls, you notice someone has left a basket outside your door. A gift? A trade? You lift the cloth. Parsnips. You grin like you've won the lottery, because in a world where meals are uncertain and flavor is more theory than reality, a fresh parsnip can feel like a miracle. Dinner's ready. It's not fancy. It's not even all that filling, but it's yours. And tonight, that's enough. The sun is gone, and with it, your sense of security. Because when night falls in the Middle Ages, the world changes. There are no streetlights, no porch lamps, no gentle glow from a neighbor's television. The village turns black, shadowy, and still lit only by the faint flicker of rushlights, tallow candles, or if you're lucky, a small fire kept burning through sheer vigilance and constant poking. You step outside to fetch more wood, and the darkness greets you like a heavy, wet cloak. The stars are bright, brighter than you've ever seen, but they don't do much for the things lurking just beyond the edge of your vision. You move fast. Not because you're scared, you are, but because you know what night brings. Thieves, rats, disease, cold, spirits, and the occasional bold wolf. Let's start with the practical threats. Your cottage doesn't have locks. It barely has a door. Just a wooden slab on creaky hinges and a latch that could be kicked open by an ambitious chicken. If someone wants to get in, they will. That someone might be a starving traveler, or a drunk neighbor, or worse, a gang of raiders who've come down from the hills looking for livestock, ale, and easy targets. Most homes have little to steal, but desperation doesn't care about inventory. You sleep with your knife under your straw pillow, Not for comfort, for insurance. You close the door behind you, bolt it with a wooden peg, and double-check the windows. Not that it helps. The thatch. Roof has holes. The walls are more draft than structure. The wind hums through the gaps like a bored ghost. And the cold? It creeps in slowly. First through your bare feet, then up your legs, then into your chest where it settles and whispers. You should have saved more firewood. But firewood is scarce. Most of the nearby trees belong to your lord. Technically, even gathering fallen branches could count as poaching. And yes, people have been fined, or worse, for that. Historians still argue how strictly these forest laws were enforced. Some records show tolerance. Others list penalties that included everything from flogging to forced labor. You're not in the mood to test it, so you ration your fuel. 1 log, maybe 2. Just enough to keep the flame alive until you drift off. But warmth isn't the only thing you're worried about. There's a scuttling in the rafters. Rats. They come out at night. Bold, relentless, and thoroughly unimpressed by your broom swinging. Technique. They steal food. They chew holes in your sacks. They nibble your toes if you sleep too deeply. You've tried setting traps, crude wooden boxes with bait, but they're clever, smarter than they have any right to be, and they bring disease. You don't know about bacteria, but you know that when the rats show up, sickness follows. You've seen it before. Your cousin's baby with the bloated belly, the baker's apprentice with black boils, the coughing that doesn't stop. And that's when the whispers begin. Is it the plague? The word is never said aloud unless it's really bad. But you can feel it in the way people stop touching, start praying, light candles for neighbors who haven't been seen in days. You settle onto your straw mattress, pulling your cloak over your shoulders. It still smells like smoke. You breathe shallowly, listening to the fire crackle, the floor creak, the occasional scratch of tiny claws above. And then come the other fears, the ones you can't see. Your grandmother used to tell stories about spirits that roam at night, restless souls, angry fairies, black dogs with red eyes and a taste for breath. You scoffed when you were younger, but now, lying here in the pitch black with your back to the door, every gust of wind sounds like footsteps. Every shifting timber sounds like a whisper. The church says not to believe in such things. That faith protects you. But the church also told you leprosy is a punishment for sin, so you're not placing all your bets. You whisper a short prayer, one of the small ones, not the long Our Father, just something about keeping the evil out and the warmth in. There's a story going around. A boy in the next village disappeared at night, just gone. No signs of struggle. His mother says she saw something tall and pale in the field. The priest says it's nonsense. The boys in the tavern say it was the White Lady, a spirit who steals children during the harvest moon. You're not a child, but you sleep with your knife anyway. Fun fact, some villagers placed protective charms over their doorways, herbs, bones, or tiny iron nails in the shape of a cross. Some even painted eyes on their shutters to scare off spirits. You haven't done any of that. Mostly because you don't want to give the rats more decorations to chew on. Your eyelids grow heavy. The fire dims. Outside, the wind moans through the trees, and somewhere, an owl calls out. A single long note that feels like a warning. You curl tighter under your cloak, breath slow, fingers wrapped around the knife handle, because in the Middle Ages, the darkness isn't just dark, it's alive. The next morning doesn't greet you so much as ambush you. You sit up slowly, spine grinding, neck stiff, one eye crusted shut from sleeping too close to the fire and inhaling a night's worth of ash. Your breath tastes like last night's stew and regret. And your arm? Still asleep. Probably because your sibling used it as a pillow, again. But no time to stretch. Because today you've got a lump behind your ear that wasn't there yesterday. You poke it. It's tender, warm. Maybe it's a bite, maybe a boil, maybe the beginning of another delightful Middle Ages mystery illness. So you do what anyone would do. You walk 2 cottages over and knock on the door of the barber surgeon. Yes, that's a real thing. He's not a doctor. There are no doctors. Not for you. And even if there were, They wouldn't come to your part of the village without a serious bribe and a guaranteed bath afterward. The barber surgeon opens the door wearing a stained apron and holding something that looks suspiciously like a fishhook. He smells of ale and garlic, and you're not entirely convinced he's sober. But hey, he has tools, he has ideas. That counts for something. You show him the lump. He squints, pokes it, grunts thoughtfully, then offers you your choices. Bloodletting, open, a vein and let the sickness flow out. Leeches, slap a few wriggling vampires onto your skin and hope they suck the badness out. A poultice, usually made of something mushy and alarming. Today's special? Onion, goose fat, and ground snail shell. You go with the poultice. He slaps it on, ties it in place with a bit of cloth that may or may not have been washed this month, and sends you home with instructions to let the smell do the work. You walk away slightly more pungent than you arrived, but at least you feel medically seen. Strange fact, barber surgeons were expected to cut hair, lance boils, extract teeth, set bones, and even perform amputations. Their toolkit was a wooden chest filled with blades, pliers, twine, and hope. Cleanliness was not standard practice, just a hopeful outcome. Historians still debate how effective these healers were. Some argue they saved countless lives using basic herbal wisdom. Others suggest they just sped things along toward the afterlife. You're hoping for the former, but also trying not to sneeze and dislodge your onion poultice. And while we're on the topic of medicine, let's talk humors. According to medieval medical theory, your body is made of 4 fluids: blood phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Get sick, one of them's out of balance. Angry, too much yellow bile. Sad, black bile, overload. Feeling gassy and confused, probably a phlegm issue. The solution? Rebalance. Through diet, leeches, vomit-inducing herbs, or being bled until your ears ring like a church bell. You once watched a man get strapped to a bench and bled until he fainted. His problem? Bad dreams. The priest said they were caused by excess heat in the brain. The barber agreed. You just nodded and went home before someone tried to bleed you for being nearby. Herbal medicine is a bit gentler, if more mysterious. The village wise woman carries pouches of dried yarrow, comfrey, chamomile, and other leafy things she claims can cure everything from headaches to heartbreak. Her remedies come with prayers, sometimes charms, and often a clove of garlic, just in case. You've visited her before. She gave you a salve for your chapped hands that worked surprisingly well. But some folks whisper about her. Too many. Potions. Too much knowledge. Too much time spent talking to plants. You like her, but you're careful who sees you going in or out. Today, you consider stopping by, but decide against it. You don't want rumors. Not while the lump on your neck is still lumpy. For now, it's you and your new aroma of sautéed goose. Back in your cottage, your youngest sibling is coughing again. A wet, chesty thing that hasn't gone away since the frost. You give them water, rub their back, whisper reassurances. But you don't know if it's just a cold or something worse, because sickness isn't an event here. It's a constant background threat, like weather or rats. There's always something going around. The sweating sickness, where you feel fine in the morning and dead by sundown. St. Anthony's fire caused by fungus in rye bread, which turns your limbs black and makes you hallucinate talking birds. Or the vague and terrifying bad air, which drifts through villages like an invisible curse. You once saw a child with a neck so swollen he couldn't breathe. The priest said it was penance. The mother said it was just the way his throat swelled sometimes. Neither did much to help. In towns, you hear rumors of plague again. Someone's cousin in the city. Swellings in the groin. Black spots. Quick deaths. Corpse carts. You remember the last outbreak. The fear, the smell, the masks stuffed with herbs. The way people stopped opening their doors. You light a candle. Not for warmth. For comfort. For hope. For the slim chance that whatever is in your neck will be gone by morning and not spreading to your chest, your lungs, your blood. Because here, you can't Google symptoms, you can't call a nurse, you can't even ask too many questions without looking suspicious. You just wait, and hope, and try not to sneeze directly into your only stew pot. You wake in the night to coughing, not the little kind that clears a throat. This is wet, rattling, and relentless, the sound of someone's lungs trying to climb out. It's your sibling again, the one who's always had a weak chest. You sit up, still half asleep, and press a damp cloth to their forehead. It's burning. You whisper their name. They barely stir. You don't say the word aloud, but it's sitting there between your ears. Plague. You've heard the stories. Who hasn't? It starts with fever, then chills, then the buboes, swollen lumps that appear in the armpits or groin, dark as bruises and tender as heartbreak. The breath turns shallow. The skin turns black, and within days, sometimes hours, the person is gone. Not peacefully, violently, quickly, messily. You light a candle and sit beside them, not because it helps, but because doing nothing is worse. You whisper a prayer, your own jumbled version, and try to pretend this is just a cold, just a winter cough hanging on too long, just not the plague. Morning comes slowly, damp, gray, heavy, the kind of sky that feels like a bad omen before anything even happens. You boil water. You steep herbs. You drape wet linen over your sibling's chest. You try everything. But the fear lingers, like smoke that won't leave your clothes. And then someone knocks. It's your neighbor, Marjorie, pale, shaking. She says her husband has a swelling under his arm. She shows you. Just a glimpse. But it's unmistakable. Purple. Bulging. Death-shaped. She says the priest is ringing the church bell early. It's back. The plague. Not a rumor. Not a whisper. Not a bad dream. The real thing. Death. Walking fast and barefoot through the village. You remember the last time? People boarded up their own houses from the outside. Whole families disappeared. Fields went untended. Livestock wandered loose. The rats grew bolder, and the carts came. Carts to collect. The dead. Your lord will try to act like he's in charge, but he's not. No one is. When plague arrives, it doesn't care about titles. Rich and poor alike cough, swell, collapse. Nobles may flee to their manors. You'll stay. You have to. You've nowhere else to go. A strange, chilling detail. Some people wear charms to ward off death. Others carry dried posies in their sleeves. The worst, they say, is the smell. It clings to everything. No one forgets it. You push the thought away. You have work to do. The baker refuses to leave his home. You volunteer to help because the village needs bread. You cover your mouth with a cloth soaked in vinegar. You wear gloves. Not because it will save you, but because it might delay the inevitable. Back in your cottage, your sibling stirs. The fever breaks. For now. You say nothing, just wipe their forehead again. The relief is so strong you almost weep, but you don't. You've got to fetch water. Keep them warm. Keep them fed. If they can eat, they can fight. Outside, a boy runs through the street yelling, "The swelling's back! The swelling's back!" You want to yell at him to stop, but he's just saying what everyone's thinking. Later that day, you see it. A cart, wooden, rattling, pulled by a donkey that looks just as exhausted as you. They're collecting bodies again. No prayers, no funeral, just quick burials, shallow, graves, lime thrown over the top. Anything to keep the air from turning. Historians still argue whether the plague spread faster through rats or people, or both. Some believe it was airborne. Some say it was fleas. Some just admit they don't fully understand how something invisible could kill half of Europe. What you do know is this. Once it starts, it's impossible to stop. You stay inside as much as you can. Cover your mouth. Boil your clothes. Air out the house. But nothing feels safe. The world shrinks down to a single task. Avoid infection. As if that were even possible. By the end of the week, 5 cottages are empty. One of them belonged to the midwife. One belonged to your cousin. You see, a man walking up the road with a wheelbarrow of straw and a blank look in his eyes. You don't ask who it's for. Inside your home, your sibling sleeps peacefully. The fever's truly gone now. They're eating again, laughing even. You still don't breathe easily, because now the village has changed. People cross themselves when passing each other. They toss herbs into their chimneys. They whisper about sins, penance, punishment. They say the world is ending. You want to believe they're wrong. But deep down, in the quiet part of your chest that only speaks in truth, you know this place will never be the same again. The days crawl by now, half life and half limbo. Your sibling survives. That alone feels like a miracle. But the village? The village has thinned. Houses sit quiet. Doors hang open. Fields go unworked. No music, no laughter, no bells except the tolling of the dead. Even the rats seem quieter, like they too are waiting. You gather water. You mend a sock. You stir the same pot of barley soup that you've stirred every evening for the past 6 years. But your thoughts drift elsewhere. You keep remembering something the tanner said before the fever took him. At least the Romans had baths. And it hits you. Like it has before. You haven't bathed in weeks. Maybe months. Probably months. And that, unfortunately, is not unusual. People always assume medieval folks never bathed. And that's partially true. The reality is messier. Literally. There were bathhouses, especially in towns. Communal ones, built around heated pools or wooden tubs, sometimes divided by gender, sometimes not. People would strip, scrub with cloths, and soak in hot water while chatting about the latest grain prices or plague rumors. There might even be oils, herbs, and, if you were fancy, rose water. But that's the dream version. The current reality? Most bathhouses are either closed or condemned, because over the past few decades, the church has grown increasingly suspicious of them. Not because they're unclean, ironically, but because they're too clean, too comfortable, too full of people lounging, sometimes naked, often gossiping, and occasionally turning bath time into extracurriculars. So the sermons started. Bathhouses breed sin. Cleanliness leads to vanity. The body must suffer so the soul may thrive. That sort of thing. And then the plague hit. Suddenly, people said bathing opened the pores and let sickness seep in. Water, once sacred and cleansing, was now suspect. Better to remain encased in your own filth than risk exposure to the vapors. So the bathhouse closed. The town's was boarded up a few years ago. The sign still hangs out front, barely legible. St. Giles's Steams, now under divine renovation. And you? You've been washing your face with cold rainwater, wiping, down your arms when you remember, and hoping the smell doesn't make your goat faint, because full-body immersion just isn't an option anymore. You consider heating some water tonight, just enough for a sponge bath, maybe even a foot soak if you're feeling decadent, but that would take firewood, and you're short, again. Instead, you wipe your hands with a scrap of old linen and call it a day. You do recall one glorious bath, though. Years ago, midsummer. A shallow wooden tub filled with river water, warmed over firestones. You'd snuck away with 2 friends, peeled off your clothes behind a hedgerow, and lowered yourself in with a hiss and a laugh. You smelled like lavender for a whole afternoon. You think about that now, as you scrape grime from your nails with the tip of a spoon. Some villagers still bathe. In secret. In rivers, mostly. Or in rain barrels when no one's looking. A few brave souls sneak into the abandoned bathhouse and swear they feel cleaner just standing near the old tubs. Others are more inventive, sitting in barrels with buckets of warm water, dousing themselves while muttering apologies to saints. A curious little detail. Some people used sand or ash to clean themselves, scrubbing it on like a gritty exfoliant before wiping it away with a dry cloth. Soap, when available, was made from lye and animal fat, a powerful caustic brick that could clean your tunic or strip the skin from your fingers. Delicate, it was not. But mostly, you just accept that you're dirty, that everyone's dirty. Historians still debate how often people bathed. Some records suggest once a week, or at least once a season. Others argue peasants may have washed more than nobles, who feared baths and preferred to perfume the problem away. One account praises a woman for being as clean as a sheep's forehead, which is not exactly comforting. You put your worn cloak on and step outside. The sun is setting. A few people move quietly between homes. No one waves, no one talks. They're all still reeling. You see the priest by the church door, burning incense, probably to bless the air, or to mask the smell, or both. You walk down to the stream, just far enough to dip your feet. The water is cold and sharp, biting at your ankles like little truths. You scrub a toe with your thumb. It's not a bath, but it's something. You think of the Romans with their marble baths and steam rooms. You think of warm pools, polished stones, and silver scoops of scented oil. You think of running water and heated floors. And you look down at your own feet. Pale, mud-streaked, calloused, but still standing. Still here, still you. The end of the day drapes itself over the village like a woolen blanket. Scratchy, slightly damp, but undeniably comforting. The air is cooler now, and the last rays of sun stretch long shadows across the ground, pooling at the foot of your cottage like spilled ink. You've survived another day, which, if we're being honest, is saying a lot. You sit outside your door for a few minutes longer, elbows on your knees, watching the smoke curl from nearby chimneys. A dog barks in the distance. Someone's banging pots 2 houses over. A baby cries, but only briefly. The world is quiet, tired, but alive. Dinner was simple. Barley stew again. But the bread was only slightly stale, and there were actual herbs in the pot. Tiny joys, you remind yourself. They're the only kind you can afford. You step back inside as the chill creeps up from the floor. The fire's burning low, crackling softly. Your sibling is asleep already, curled into the same cloak they wear by day. You check their forehead, cool now, breathing steady. You let out a breath you didn't realize you'd been holding. You settle onto your straw mattress, wrapping your thin blanket tight across your shoulders. Your tunic still smells like smoke and onions. You haven't washed it in, you've stopped counting. But the stink of survival is something everyone shares, and in that, there's a kind of unity. Tomorrow will be another day of the same. Labor, aches, fear, small victories, odd superstitions, and the constant, quiet miracle of waking up in one piece. But for now you let your eyes close, and with that, we enter the wind down. The fire hums in the hearth, a soft, rhythmic pop, the kind of sound that settles into your chest, like it's whispering that everything for now is okay. Outside, the wind has calmed. It brushes gently through the thatch like a lullaby. The goats have gone quiet. The last lantern down the path flickers once, then fades. The world narrows to the soft creak of beams, the warm smell of wood smoke, and the feeling of a wool blanket pulled just under your chin. Your breath slows. The straw under your back crackles softly with every shift, but you're too tired to move, too full of bread and silence. The cold stays at the edges of the room now. The fire keeps just enough warmth in the air to carry you gently toward sleep. There's nothing more to do tonight. No fields to tend. No stews to stir. No spirits to ward off. Only this. Stillness. Breathing. The soft rise and fall of life continuing. Even here. Even now. Even after everything. Your eyelids grow heavy. Your jaw softens. Even your thoughts begin to fade. Like candle. Smoke curling toward the ceiling beams. Tomorrow will come. With noise and dirt and chores and maybe, just maybe, a moment of quiet joy. But not yet. Not now. Now you rest.